A high-profile divorce hearing turns into chaos when a millionaire's mistress kicks his pregnant wife down the courthouse steps in front of hundreds of witnesses and flashing cameras. The fall shatters not only bones but illusions of power, and what begins as a scandal becomes a national reckoning. As the wife lies unconscious, her ex-Marine brother steps out of the crowd and vows to bring them both to justice. What follows is a story of corruption, redemption, and the unstoppable fight for truth. Stay with me, because you'll want to see how this ends. Tell us what time you're watching and where you're tuning in from, and drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The marble steps of the Los Angeles Federal Courthouse gleamed under a pale winter Sunday. Reporters crowded near the entrance, microphones in hand, their breath misting in the cold air. They had been waiting for this moment all morning. The divorce hearing of millionaire real estate mogul Grant Caldwell had already drawn headlines, but no one expected what was about to unfold on those white stone steps. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. The door opened slowly. Amber Lowell stepped out, holding her small handbag against her side. At 7 months pregnant, her movements were careful, her body balancing the weight of both fear and dignity. She wore a light yellow maternity dress that brushed just below her knees, its soft fabric glowing faintly under the morning light. Her face was pale but composed, the kind of calm that hides deep exhaustion. Cameras clicked as she began walking toward the courthouse, her heels tapping gently against the marble. Behind the crowd, another car door slammed. Veronica Shaw emerged, her red dress sharp against the gray city around her. She was younger, glamorous, confident. Every step she took seemed meant for an audience. Reporters turned, recognizing her instantly as the woman rumored to be Grant's mistress. A hush fell over the group as Veronica strode forward, the sound of her heels cutting through the noise. She smiled coldly when she saw Amber at the top of the stairs. "So you actually showed up," Veronica said loudly enough for nearby cameras to hear. "I thought you'd finally learn to hide your face." Amber stopped, her hand resting on her belly. "I didn't come to argue," she said quietly. "Please, just move aside." But Veronica stepped closer, her perfume heavy in the air. "You don't get to play the victim anymore," she hissed. "You lost him. Accept it." Amber took a slow breath and tried to keep walking. The reporters were watching. Flashbulbs fired again. Someone whispered, "Is that the wife?" Another voice replied, "That's her, the pregnant one." Amber reached for the railing, trying to steady herself. Veronica followed, her words sharp and venomous. "You think showing up like this makes people pity you?" she said. "You're pathetic." Amber's lips trembled. "You don't know what you're saying." Veronica laughed. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying. You should have stayed home. No one wants to see you anymore." 1. Grant Caldwell appeared at the doorway above them, his expression unreadable. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, sunglasses hiding his eyes. He didn't move toward either woman. He simply stood and watched. Amber turned toward him, her eyes pleading for something. Acknowledgement, protection, maybe even a shred of decency. Grant didn't respond. The silence between them felt heavier than the crowd's whispers. Veronica saw his indifference and smiled wider. "See, even he doesn't want you here," she said. "You're just an inconvenience." Amber's pulse quickened. The cameras were still rolling. "Please," she whispered. "There's a child involved." Veronica leaned forward. "That's your problem, not ours." A murmur swept through the reporters. One cameraman lifted his lens higher, sensing a story growing darker by the second. Amber took another cautious step up the stairs, clutching the railing. Her heels slipped slightly on the cold marble. Veronica reached out, not to help, but to shove. The motion was sudden, vicious, and full of intent. The kick landed squarely against Amber's stomach. The sound was soft, but the gasp that followed was deafening. Amber's eyes widened. Pain surged through her body like electricity. Her bag fell from her hand, scattering papers across the steps. She stumbled backward, arms flailing for balance. A scream rose from the crowd. Someone shouted, "She's pregnant!" Cameras flashed in rapid bursts, capturing every frame. The red dress, the yellow fabric twisting, the look of shock frozen on Amber's face. She hit the steps hard, rolling once before stopping halfway down. The world tilted around her. The sharp chill of marble pressed against her cheek. She could hear people shouting, feet running, sirens somewhere in the distance. Her vision blurred, and the edges of her consciousness began to fade. Through the ringing in her ears, she could still make out Veronica's voice trembling. "I didn't mean to! She fell!" Grant finally moved, his steps slow and uncertain. He stopped halfway down the stairs, staring at Amber as if unsure what to do. Reporters crowded closer, shouting his name. One of them screamed, "Did you see what happened? She kicked her!" The questions came from every direction, but Grant said nothing. His jaw tightened. His eyes darted toward the nearest camera, then back to the woman lying motionless on the steps. Blood began to bloom across the yellow fabric of Amber's dress. Her hand trembled as she reached toward her stomach, whispering something no one could hear. The noise of the crowd grew louder. Phones recorded every second. A paramedic pushed through the barrier, kneeling beside her. "Ma'am, stay still," he said urgently. "Can you hear me?" Amber's lips parted, but no sound came out. She blinked once, her gaze drifting toward the gray sky above. The marble steps felt colder now, the air heavier. Somewhere beyond the chaos, the courthouse doors creaked open again, and a shadow moved toward the scene. A tall figure in a dark coat, his face set with purpose. The paramedic pressed a cloth against her side. "We need a stretcher here now," he shouted. Cameras kept flashing. Reporters were yelling into microphones. Police sirens grew closer, echoing down the street. Amber's vision flickered. For a brief second, she thought she heard a familiar voice calling her name through the noise, steady and fierce. Her eyelids grew heavy. The world dimmed around her, until all that remained was the faint hum of chaos and the distant echo of that voice growing nearer. The yellow of her dress, now streaked with red, became the last color she saw before everything went dark. And in that final moment of silence, the faint sound of rushing footsteps grew louder, the beginning of something far greater than anyone on those courthouse steps could yet imagine. The chaos that erupted on the courthouse steps felt like the city itself had stopped breathing. Reporters shouted over each other, their cameras flashing in every direction, the air filled with sirens and fear. Then a voice cut through the noise, deep and commanding. "Move! Get out of the way!" A tall man in a dark coat pushed through the wall of people. His eyes were fierce, focused entirely on the motionless woman in yellow, lying at the base of the marble stairs. His name was Ethan Lowell, and the woman bleeding on the ground was his sister, Amber. He had been walking toward the courthouse to meet her when he saw the crowd shift and heard the screams. Now, seeing her body trembling weakly on the steps, he moved with the urgency of a soldier back on the battlefield. He dropped to his knees beside her, his coat sweeping over the cold marble. "Amber, it's me! I'm here!" he said, his voice low but trembling. Her eyelashes fluttered once. Her lips moved, but no words came. Blood stained the light yellow fabric of her dress. Ethan pressed his hand gently against her wrist, searching for a pulse. When he felt the faint rhythm beneath her skin, relief and terror collided inside him. "She's alive!" he shouted. "Someone call for medical help!" A few feet away, Veronica Shaw stood frozen, her red dress vivid against the chaos. The reporters turned their cameras toward her as whispers spread. "That's the mistress," someone said. "She kicked her." Veronica's hands shook. "It was an accident," she insisted, her voice breaking. "She fell. I didn't mean to." Ethan turned his head slowly toward her, his expression sharp enough to silence the crowd. His eyes were dark, steady, filled with a kind of rage that only comes from love and betrayal. "You didn't mean to?" he repeated quietly. "You kicked a pregnant woman down the stairs." Veronica stumbled backward. "No, Stop talking," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Every word you say will be on camera." The reporters fell silent for a moment, stunned by his presence. Ethan's tone carried the weight of authority, honed from years in the Marine Corps and the courtroom alike. He looked up toward the courthouse doors. At the top stood Grant Caldwell, his brother-in-law, still frozen in place. His hands were at his sides, his face pale, as if he didn't know which direction to turn. Ethan rose to his feet, standing tall at the bottom of the stairs. "Grant!" he called. "You saw it. Say something." Grant hesitated, glancing at the cameras surrounding him. "It was an accident," he said finally, his voice cold. "She slipped." "Liar," Ethan said, his jaw tightening. "There are cameras everywhere. The truth is already recorded. You just don't know it yet." A nearby officer moved through the crowd, trying to restore order. "Everyone step back," he ordered. "Make room for paramedics." Ethan knelt beside Amber again. Her breathing was shallow. He pulled off his coat and folded it under her head to keep her from lying directly on the marble. "Stay with me," he whispered. "You're safe. I've got you." Amber's fingers twitched faintly against his hand, but her eyes remained closed. Veronica turned to Grant, panic setting in. "Do something," she pleaded. "They think I—" Grant raised a hand to silence her, his expression empty. "Don't speak," he said through clenched teeth. "Not a word." Ethan heard him and looked up again. "Too late," he said. "You both spoke enough already." A faint red light blinked above the courthouse doorway. One of the reporters pointed upward. "That's the security feed," he said. "It caught everything." Ethan's gaze followed the reporter's finger. The tiny red light flashed steadily, indifferent and merciless. "Good," he muttered under his breath. "The truth will stay alive even if she can't speak for now." The sound of sirens grew louder. 2 ambulances pulled up at the bottom of the courthouse steps. Paramedics jumped out, carrying stretchers and medical bags. "Where's the patient?" one of them shouted. Ethan waved them forward. "Here! She's pregnant and bleeding. Be careful." The medics worked quickly, checking her pulse, wrapping a bandage around her abdomen, and placing a collar around her neck. One of them looked up at Ethan. "Are you family?" "I'm her brother," he replied. "I'm coming with her." They lifted Amber gently onto the stretcher. Her hair brushed against his arm, her face pale against the yellow of her dress. For a moment, Ethan's breath caught. The last time he had seen her like this was years ago, when they were children and she had fallen off her bike. Back then, he had carried her home. Now, all he could do was make sure she didn't die in front of the world. The reporters shouted questions as the paramedics started down the steps. "Mr. Lowell, are you pressing charges? Was it premeditated? What will happen to the mistress?" Ethan ignored them all. His focus was on Amber, her stillness terrifying. The paramedics reached the bottom of the stairs, pushing the stretcher toward the waiting ambulance. Ethan followed closely, his coat flapping in the cold wind. Veronica tried to approach, but a police officer stopped her. "Ma'am, stay where you are. You'll need to make a statement." Grant shouted something at the officer, but the crowd's noise drowned him out. He looked around, trapped in a storm of cameras and flashing lights. Ethan turned one last time to face them both. His voice was low but carried across the chaos. "Everything that happened here," he said, "is going to follow you for the rest of your lives." Then he climbed into the back of the ambulance, taking his place beside his sister. The paramedic shut the door. Outside, the reporters pressed closer, trying to get one final shot. Veronica's voice cracked as she screamed something no one could understand. The police began to push the crowd back. Grant stood on the steps, surrounded by flashing lights, his face expressionless. Inside the ambulance, Ethan leaned over Amber, holding her hand tightly as the siren began to wail. The lights outside turned the city into a blur of red and white. He didn't look back at the courthouse. There was nothing left there for him except lies. As the ambulance pulled into traffic, Ethan whispered, "Hold on, Amber. Just hold on." The city raced past them, and the sound of the siren rose higher, cutting through the noise of everything that had just shattered. In the next moment, the ambulance disappeared into the maze of streets, carrying both the wounded woman and the beginning of the fight that was yet to come. The ambulance doors flew open as the vehicle stopped in front of St. Mary's Hospital. The bright red lights flashed against the white walls, painting the entrance in streaks of urgency. A team of doctors and nurses rushed forward with a gurney. Ethan stepped out first, his face tense, his eyes fixed on his sister lying motionless inside. "Pregnant female, 7 months," the paramedic shouted as they rolled her down the ramp. "Severe abdominal trauma, possible internal bleeding, fetal heartbeat unstable." The words stabbed into Ethan like shards of glass. He followed beside the gurney, matching every hurried step of the medical team. "Her name is Amber Lowell," he said quickly. 30 years old, no known allergies. Her blood type is O positive. The nurse at the front nodded. "We've got it. Please step back." "I'm her brother," Ethan said firmly. "I'm not leaving her." "You can follow us to triage," she replied without looking up, "but you'll need to wait once we start the procedure." They burst through the sliding doors into the emergency corridor. The air inside was cold and sharp, filled with the scent of antiseptic. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Every second felt heavier than the last. Amber's yellow dress was soaked in dark stains, the color fading into something unrecognizable. Her hand hung limp over the side of the stretcher. A doctor in green scrubs jogged alongside them, BP dropping. "Get me a line in. Start fluids now," he said to a nurse. He turned to Ethan for a brief second. "Sir, we'll do everything we can, but you need to let us work." Ethan's throat tightened. He forced himself to step back, watching as they wheeled Amber through the double doors toward the trauma room. The sound of the doors, slamming shut, echoed through the corridor like a final heartbeat. He stood still, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes had seen. A nurse approached him with a clipboard. "Sir, we'll need you to fill out her admission form. Family contact, next of kin, that sort of thing." Ethan took the clipboard, but his hand trembled so badly that the pen scraped across the paper. "She's all the family I have left," he murmured. "So just put my name, Ethan Lowell." The nurse nodded quietly and left him in the hallway. Through the glass window of the trauma room, Ethan could see flashes of movement, doctors surrounding Amber, machines beeping in rapid rhythms, masks being adjusted. He couldn't hear the words, but he knew the tone. It was the language of emergency, a sound he had heard before in places far from home. The difference now was that this battlefield carried his sister's name. A few minutes later, a young nurse hurried out. "We need more blood bags from supply," she called out, then glanced at Ethan as she passed. Her expression was tight, professional, but her eyes said what her mouth couldn't. Things were bad. Ethan rubbed his hands together, trying to keep control. He could hear the faint, repetitive tone of the fetal monitor through the half-open door, steady at first, then skipping. The pattern reminded him of footsteps fading in the distance. He closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "Come on, Amber. Hold on." A moment later, the doors swung open again, and Dr. Nathan Brooks, the attending physician, stepped out. His gloves were stained, his eyes calm but heavy. "Mr. Lowell," he said, "your sister's stable for now, but she's in critical condition. We had to sedate her. She's fallen into a coma. The baby's heart rate is irregular, but still present." Ethan stared at him. "A coma?" "She suffered severe shock," Dr. Brooks explained. "Her body shut down to protect itself. Right now, our job is to keep both her and the baby alive. The next 48 hours are crucial." Ethan nodded slowly. "Can I see her?" The doctor hesitated. "Only for a minute. She won't respond, but she'll know someone's there." They led him into the room. Amber lay under the bright lights, connected to wires and tubes. Her chest rose and fell gently, the monitor beside her pulsing with faint green lines. Her skin looked pale against the crisp white sheets. The soft hum of machines filled the silence. Ethan stepped closer, his shadow stretching across her bed. "Hey, sis," he whispered. "You're safe now." He reached for her hand, careful not to disturb the 4-line. Her fingers were cold. He squeezed them lightly. "I'm right here. You just rest. I'll handle the rest of it." Behind him, Dr. Brooks spoke quietly to a nurse. "Let's get her transferred to intensive care. I want fetal monitoring every 30 minutes. You." Ethan didn't look away from Amber. His thoughts spiraled through memories, the last Thanksgiving they'd spent together, the laughter, the way she had teased him for still drinking black coffee like a soldier. He swallowed hard. "You always said I'd show up too late," he said under his breath. "Not this time." A nurse adjusted the monitor. The heart rate of the unborn child fluttered across the screen, faint but steady. Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing just a little. He turned to Dr. Brooks. "Will she wake up?" The doctor paused before answering. "We don't know yet. She's strong. That's in her favor." Ethan nodded once. "She's the strongest person I know." Dr. Brooks gave him a small nod of respect. "I'll keep you updated every hour." When the doctor left, Ethan stood alone by the bedside. The hospital corridor outside was filled with movement, nurses calling out numbers, phones ringing, doors opening and closing, yet inside the room, everything felt suspended. Time didn't move here. It simply waited. He looked down at Amber's face again. "They hurt you in front of the world," he whispered. "Now the world's going to see what justice looks like." The faint beep of the monitor filled the silence. He placed her hand gently back on the blanket, straightened up, and turned toward the door. As he reached the hallway, Detective Laura Ruiz was waiting, her notepad in hand. "Mr. Lowell," she said, I've seen the footage. We need to talk when you're ready. Ethan met her gaze. Tomorrow morning, he said quietly. Tonight, I stay here. Ruiz nodded and walked away. Ethan looked once more through the small window at Amber lying still in her hospital bed. The corridor lights flickered as night settled over Los Angeles. Outside, rain began to fall against the glass. Inside, the steady beeping of the monitor continued, a fragile reminder that she was still fighting. And as Ethan sat down in the chair beside the door, he knew that from this moment forward, the fight for justice had truly begun. The morning after the attack, Los Angeles woke up to flashing headlines. Every television in every diner, courthouse, and office lobby carried the same story. Millionaire's mistress kicks pregnant wife down the courthouse steps, caught on camera. News anchors spoke in grave tones as the video replayed again and again. The clip showed Amber Lowell in her light yellow dress turning away, the sudden violent motion of Veronica Shaw's leg, and the sickening fall that followed. Across the city, people stopped what they were doing to watch. The footage lasted only 10 seconds, but it carried the weight of a nation's outrage. In the hospital waiting area, Ethan Lowell watched the broadcast in silence. He sat with his hands clasped, his eyes fixed on the screen. The video ended with the image of his sister's body lying motionless on the marble stairs. The camera cut to a reporter outside St. Mary's Hospital. Amber Lowell remains in a coma tonight, the reporter said. Her brother, federal attorney Ethan Lowell, has vowed to pursue justice. Ethan rose slowly, his reflection flashing across the television glass. They've already turned her pain into news, he murmured, his jaw tightened. Fine. Then they'll hear the truth from me. Outside, the hospital courtyard was crowded with journalists. Cameras pointed toward the main entrance, lights glaring. A swarm of microphones extended toward anyone wearing a hospital badge. When Ethan stepped through the doors, the noise hit him like a wave. Questions came from every direction. Mr. Lowell, how is your sister? Will she survive? Do you plan to file criminal charges against Grant Caldwell or Veronica Shaw? Ethan raised a hand. You'll get your answers, he said, his voice steady. But first, you'll hear facts, not gossip. He stopped before the cameras, shoulders squared, the press lights reflecting off his coat. The flashbulbs flickered, freezing him in time like a figure from a courtroom drama. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan began, his words calm but sharp. My sister, Amber Lowell, is fighting for her life because of what happened on those courthouse steps. This was not an accident. This was an act of violence, committed in public, under the eye of the law. A murmur spread through the crowd. Ethan continued, his voice unwavering. There is clear video evidence, there are witnesses, and there will be accountability. I will personally represent my sister in all legal proceedings. We will pursue charges for assault, obstruction of justice, and every violation that follows from this crime. Reporters shouted for more. What about Grant Caldwell? Was he involved? Ethan met the question head-on. Mr. Caldwell's silence speaks for itself, he said. He watched and did nothing. The law calls that complicity, and in this country, no one, no matter how rich or powerful, is above the law. The flash of cameras intensified. The tension around him crackled like static. One journalist called out, "Do you expect a conviction?" "I expect justice," Ethan replied, "and justice begins with the truth." He turned and walked back inside before they could ask anything else. The crowd erupted in a frenzy of shouting and camera clicks. Behind him, the hospital doors closed, muting the chaos like a curtain falling between two worlds. Inside, Detective Laura Ruiz stood near the elevator, holding a folder thick with reports. "That was bold," she said as Ethan approached. "It needed to be," he replied. "They were already building their version of the story. I'm not giving them the chance to twist it." Ruiz nodded. "We've secured the courthouse footage. The entire sequence is clear. The kick, the fall, everything. I'll file it with the prosecutor this afternoon." "Good," Ethan said. "Then we move forward." He followed her to a small office that the police had set up inside the hospital. On the wall, a monitor played the courthouse video on loop. Each time Amber fell, the sound of gasps filled the room, even though everyone had already seen it. Ruiz paused the frame right as Veronica's foot made contact. "Intent," she said. "It's obvious. No jury will believe otherwise." "Len." Ethan's gaze stayed on the screen. The image was pixelated, grainy, but still too real. "Intent," he repeated quietly. "That's exactly what they'll face." Later that afternoon, the news continued to spread. Talk shows debated the case, social media exploded with anger, and protesters began gathering outside the courthouse, carrying signs that read, "Justice for Amber," and "Stop calling abuse love." The story had moved beyond scandal. It had become a movement. Inside her hospital room, Amber lay unconscious beneath the steady rhythm of machines. The camera lights from outside reflected faintly on the window glass. Ethan stood by her bedside, watching her breathe. "They're talking about you everywhere," he whispered. "But I'll make sure they know who you really are, not just what happened to you." Dr. Brooks entered quietly, checking the monitors. "She's stable," he said. "Still critical, but stable." Ethan nodded. "That's all that matters for now." "Oh." Brooks looked at him carefully. "You're carrying a lot on your shoulders. You need to rest too." Ethan gave a tired smile. "Rest can wait. Justice can't." The doctor said nothing more and left the room. Ethan turned back toward the window. Down below, the flashing lights from the reporters shimmered like reflections of fire. The city was watching. Every camera lens pointed toward this hospital had become an unintentional witness. Across town, in a penthouse suite overlooking downtown Los Angeles, Grant Caldwell watched the same broadcast in silence. Veronica sat beside him, her face pale, her hands shaking as she held a glass of water. "They're turning everyone against us," she said. "You have to do something." Grant lowered the volume. "I am," he said coldly. "I'm calling my lawyers." Veronica set down the glass, her eyes wide. "They have the video, Grant! You can't fix this!" Grant stared out the window. "You underestimate what money can fix." Back at Street Mary's, Ethan was still by the window when Detective Ruiz returned. "The footage is secure," she said. "Tomorrow we'll issue the official charges." Ethan nodded. "Good. Then tomorrow the fight begins." He looked once more at his sister. Her face was still, but her chest rose with steady breaths. The monitor beside her bed beeped softly, like a fragile heartbeat echoing in the quiet room. Outside, the wind began to rise, rattling the glass. The storm that had started on the courthouse steps was growing larger, spreading through television screens and across the hearts of everyone who had seen that video. Ethan turned off the light and whispered, "Rest, Amber. I'll keep them from writing your story for you." "Ah." As he left the room, the faint glow of the monitor reflected on her hand, and the camera light from outside flickered across the window, a small, rhythmic pulse that matched the sound of the machines. It was the quiet before the storm that would define everything to come. The blinds in Grant Caldwell's private office were half closed, blocking out most of the afternoon light. Outside, the city burned with noise, reporters, protesters, and the endless sound of helicopter blades cutting the air. Inside, the silence was thick enough to strangle. The television on the far wall played the news on mute, showing slow-motion footage of the courthouse steps. Every station had the same loop: Amber Lowell in a yellow dress, Veronica Shaw in red, the kick, the fall, the crowd screaming. Grant stood with his back to the screen, staring out the window. His reflection looked older than he remembered, the dark circles under his eyes deepening with every headline. Veronica paced behind him, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "You have to say something," she said, her voice high and frantic. "They're calling me a monster, Grant. They're showing that video every hour. I can't even step outside." Grant didn't turn around. "Then don't." Her breath caught. "That's it? That's all you have to say?" He finally faced her. His expression was cold, his voice sharper than glass. "Do you realize what you've done? Do you have any idea what this looks like?" Veronica's eyes filled with tears. "It was an accident. I didn't mean to hurt her. I panicked." "An accident," Grant repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "You kicked a pregnant woman in front of 200 witnesses. You've ruined everything." "Herr Engerflahl, you said you'd protect me." "I said I'd protect my company," he snapped. "And right now, you're the reason it's burning to the ground." Veronica stopped pacing. Her hands trembled as she looked at him. "So what happens to me?" Grant picked up the remote and raised the volume on the television. The news anchor's voice filled the room. Public outrage continues to grow as protesters demand the arrest of Grant Caldwell and Veronica Shaw. Federal attorney Ethan Lowell confirmed this morning that criminal charges are being prepared. Veronica's face went pale. "They're charging us?" Grant lowered the remote slowly. "They're charging you." She took a step back. "You're not serious." "I've already spoken to my lawyers," he said, adjusting his tie. "They're preparing a statement. You'll claim emotional distress, temporary loss of control. Whatever they decide works best. You'll plead out, take a deal, disappear for a while." "Ugh. You're going to let me take the blame?" His tone didn't change. "You're the one who kicked her." Veronica's hands balled into fists. "You're unbelievable. You told me she was ruining your life. You told me she trapped you. You said—" He cut her off. "I said a lot of things. Now stop talking before you make this worse." The room fell silent except for the steady hum of the television. Veronica turned toward the window. Outside, camera flashes flickered like lightning. "They hate me," she whispered. "They want to destroy me." Grant looked down at the news ticker, scrolling across the bottom of the screen. "Justice for Amber. Movement spreads nationwide." His jaw clenched. "They can try," he muttered. Across town, Ethan Lowell sat at a conference table covered with folders, flash drives, and printed reports. Detective Ruiz stood beside him, scrolling through security footage on a laptop. "Here," she said, pausing the video. "You can see it clearly now. No contact before the kick. No provocation. This will hold up in court." Ethan leaned closer, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Get this to the prosecutor's office before midnight. I want every copy logged and encrypted." Ruiz nodded. "Already in motion. We've also gathered witness statements. 2 reporters, 1 courthouse guard, and a bystander all confirmed the same thing." Ethan straightened, rubbing his forehead. "Good. Then tomorrow, we file the assault charges." Ruiz hesitated. "And Grant Caldwell?" Ethan's voice hardened. "He'll be next." He covered it up. He used his money to bury stories, silence people, twist the narrative. That's obstruction of justice. Ruiz sighed. "You're making powerful enemies." "I've fought worse," he said. "I'm not afraid of them." Back in Grant's office, the door swung open as one of his attorneys entered carrying a folder. "We have a problem," the man said. "The police already have the security footage. It's been verified and leaked to the press." Grant's face drained of color. "Leaked?" "Yes. Someone in the department sent it to multiple outlets. It's everywhere now." Veronica gasped, clutching her chest. "No, no, no, no. This can't be happening." Grant turned away, his hands tightening into fists. "Shut it off," he told the lawyer. "Turn it off." The lawyer hesitated. "It's too late, sir. The damage is done." The television replayed the footage again. The camera zoomed in on Veronica's face just before the kick. Freeze frame. The headline beneath it read, "Caught in the act." Grant slammed his fist on the desk. "I built this empire from nothing, and now one mistake destroys it all." Veronica's voice cracked. "It wasn't just my mistake." He ignored her. "Get my PR team on the line," he ordered the lawyer. "We're going to bury this. Pay whoever you have to. Threaten lawsuits. Make it disappear." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Caldwell, this isn't going away. Ethan Lowell's already leading the charge. Public opinion's not on your side." Grant stared at the window again, his reflection ghostly against the city lights. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "Then we make new allies," he said quietly. "If the law wants a fight, they'll get one." Down in the hospital lobby, Ethan finished his call with the district attorney's office. "The paperwork's ready," he said. "We'll file first thing in the morning." "No." He hung up and turned to Ruiz. "Tomorrow, the city will hear the charges. They'll finally see what he really is." Ruiz nodded, tucking her notepad away. "You know, once this starts, it won't stop. The press will eat it alive." Ethan's eyes hardened. "Good. Let them." The world watched her fall. Now they'll watch her rise again. Up in his penthouse, Grant poured himself a drink, his hand unsteady. On the muted television, Ethan's press conference from the previous day played again. "No one is above the law," Ethan said, his voice calm and sure. Grant turned the volume up, staring at the screen as if he could silence it through sheer will. "We'll see about that," he whispered. Far below, thunder rumbled over the city. Storm clouds rolled in from the west, darkening the skyline. The lights of the courthouse flickered in the distance. Inside street, Mary's. Amber lay motionless, her heart monitor beeping softly against the rising storm. The air was heavy, thick with the promise of what was coming next. And when the clock struck midnight, the first drops of rain began to fall, the quiet signal that the war for justice had officially begun. By the next morning, Los Angeles was drowning in headlines. Every newspaper and talk show carried the same war of words. One side painted Grant Caldwell as a misunderstood businessman married to a woman emotionally unstable. The other called him what he truly was, a man hiding behind money and lies. Grant's public relations team moved fast. Paid experts flooded television screens, repeating the same lines. Amber Lowell was known for her erratic behavior. "There's no proof, mister." Caldwell was involved. The so-called attack was exaggerated by the media. They spoke with polished voices and confident smiles, trying to rewrite what the cameras had already shown. Inside his penthouse office, Grant watched the coverage with quiet satisfaction. Veronica sat across from him, pale and nervous. "They're believing it," she said, half whispering. Grant nodded. "People believe what comforts them. No one wants to think a rich man could let his pregnant wife be hurt." He poured himself a drink. "By the end of the week, the narrative will shift." Veronica didn't share his calm. "And what about the brother? He's everywhere. He's turning people against us." Grant's eyes narrowed. "Ethan Lowell won't last long under pressure. He's emotional. He's acting out of anger." She stared at him, her voice shaking. "You don't know him. I've seen the way he looks at you. He'll destroy everything." Grant smirked faintly. "Let him try." "No." Across the city, Ethan sat in a small studio surrounded by cameras and microphones. The air buzzed with the hum of live broadcast equipment. The host of the morning news show leaned forward. "Mr. Lowell, there are statements circulating that your sister has a history of mental instability. Care to respond?" Ethan didn't flinch. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "Those statements are false. My sister is a survivor of domestic abuse. When abusers are caught, they do what abusers always do. They discredit the victim." The host hesitated. "So you're saying this is a cover-up?" "I'm saying," Ethan replied, looking directly into the camera, "that when a man has enough money to silence the truth, it becomes everyone's responsibility to speak louder." The studio went silent. The broadcast would replay across the country for the rest of the day. That afternoon, social media exploded. Hashtags multiplied. The number "Justice for Amber" trended nationwide. Thousands of women shared their own stories of violence and manipulation, posting photos of yellow ribbons on courthouse steps. The movement had outgrown the case itself. It had become a cry for something bigger. At St. Mary's Hospital, the noise from the outside world echoed faintly through the walls. Ethan stood in the hallway outside Amber's room, phone pressed to his ear. "Yes, I've seen the reports," he said sharply. "Send every document to the district attorney. I want copies of the financial transfers Caldwell made last week. He paid off 2 reporters and 1 security guard. We'll prove it." Detective Ruiz walked up beside him, holding a tablet. "We traced the PR payments," she said. "All routed through shell companies tied to Caldwell Holdings. It's more than defamation now. It's tampering." Ethan exhaled, his voice low. "Then we build the case. Start drafting subpoenas." Ruiz nodded. "And the hearing date?" "Tomorrow," he said. "They wanted a public show. They'll get one." In the penthouse, Grant's confidence began to crack. The PR firm that had promised control now called in panic. "The movement's too strong," the manager said over speakerphone. "Every time we release a statement, Ethan Lowell counters it within minutes. People believe him." Grant slammed his glass down on the table. "Then discredit him. Dig into his past. Find something." "There's nothing to find," the manager replied. "He's clean. He's a veteran, a federal attorney, and his sister's dying. You can't win this narrative anymore." Grant turned off the speakerphone without a word. Veronica watched him from across the room. "What do we do now?" He stared out the window, his reflection distorted by the glass. "We prepare for court." Night fell across the city. Outside the courthouse, protesters lit candles, their voices blending in chants that echoed through the streets. The flickering lights reflected off the marble columns like stars. Inside the hospital, Ethan sat by Amber's bedside. Her face was peaceful, untouched by the chaos outside. He reached for her hand and whispered, "They're trying to erase you, but I won't let them." The The door opened quietly. Dr. Brooks stepped in. "You should get some rest," he said gently. Ethan shook his head. "I'll rest after the verdict." Brooks hesitated. "Her vitals are steady tonight. That's something." Ethan gave a small nod. "Good. She'll want to be awake when this is over." Across town, Detective Ruiz stood in her office reviewing evidence. On her screen was a series of emails between Grant and his lawyer discussing ways to neutralize public sympathy. The subject line read, "Strategy Update." She copied the files to a flash drive and locked it in a drawer. "See you in court," she said quietly to herself. The following morning, the courthouse plaza was unrecognizable. Barricades lined the steps, police kept order, and journalists filled every inch of space. The protesters returned, carrying signs painted in bold yellow letters. "Truth has no price. Stand with Amber." Ethan arrived early, wearing a dark suit. He carried a folder under his arm, the evidence that would shift the case forever. Detective Ruiz met him at the entrance. "You're ready?" she asked. He nodded. "More than ready." Up in the penthouse, Grant adjusted his tie, his reflection cold and perfect in the mirror. Veronica stood behind him, clutching her purse. "They'll eat us alive," she whispered. He didn't answer. He simply walked past her, his steps echoing on the marble floor. "Let them try," he said under his breath. The motorcade outside waited to take him downtown. As the doors closed, the city's noise surged like a storm building to its peak. In the hospital room, the morning light spilled across Amber's bed. Her heart monitor beeped steadily. Ethan's words from the night before seemed to linger in the air. "They're trying to erase you, but I won't let them." At that very moment, his car pulled up to the courthouse steps. Cameras turned. Microphones rose. The doors opened. Ethan stepped out into the light, carrying the folder that held the truth. The roar of the crowd met him head-on. He didn't look back. He walked toward the courthouse doors as the chants grew louder. "Justice for Amber! Justice for Amber!" Inside, the press gathered, the cameras positioned, and the tension coiled tight as a drawn bow. Tomorrow's headlines would decide everything, and as Ethan took his seat at the plaintiff's table, the clock struck 10. The bailiff called for order. The courtroom fell silent. The trial of Grant Caldwell and Veronica Shaw had begun. The federal courthouse of Los Angeles stood like a fortress under a clouded sky. Crowds filled the plaza, their voices echoing between the marble columns. Police officers held the barricades, cameras flashed, and television crews narrated every movement. Inside, the air was charged with tension. Every seat in the courtroom was taken. The trial of Grant Caldwell and Veronica Shaw had become more than a case. It was the moment the city had been waiting for. At the plaintiff's table sat Ethan Lowell, his dark suit pressed, his expression calm but unyielding. He placed a single folder before him, the evidence he had fought to secure. To his right sat Detective Laura Ruiz, silent but alert. Across the aisle, Grant and Veronica whispered to their lawyers, their faces pale under the fluorescent lights. The bailiff called for order. "All rise," the Honorable Judge Helen Strauss presiding. Everyone stood as the judge entered. She was a tall woman in her 60s, her robe immaculate, her expression firm but composed. She glanced at the defense, then at Ethan. "You may be seated," she said. As the murmurs faded, the judge began. "This court is convened to hear the case of the state of California versus Grant Caldwell and Veronica Shaw. The charges include aggravated assault, obstruction of justice, and public endangerment. The court expects order, and it will have it." Ethan stood. "Your Honor, before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that my sister, Mrs. Amber Lowell, cannot be present today. She remains in critical condition at St. Mary's Hospital. I represent her both as legal counsel and as family." Judge Strauss gave a small nod. "Acknowledged, Mr. Lowell. Proceed." He walked to the center of the courtroom, every step deliberate. "On the morning of January 10th, my sister was attacked on the steps of this very courthouse. The act was caught on camera. What began as an assault has since exposed a web of deceit, manipulation, and abuse hidden beneath wealth and privilege. Today, the evidence will speak for itself." He turned toward the projector. "Play Exhibit A." The courtroom lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. The video from that morning filled the wall. The crowd outside gasped as they saw it. Amber in her yellow dress, her hand on her stomach, Veronica's face twisted in fury, and then the kick. The sound of Amber's scream echoed through the speakers, followed by the thud of her body hitting the marble. For a moment, the courtroom was silent. Even the reporters lowered their cameras. Ethan's voice broke the stillness. There it is, the truth. No editing, no manipulation, just a pregnant woman being kicked down the stairs by her husband's mistress while her husband watched. Grant shifted in his seat. His lawyer rose quickly. Objection. The video lacks context. There was provocation. UA. Ethan turned to face the judge. Provocation? The only provocation here is arrogance. My sister's presence at the courthouse that day was legally required. The defense will claim emotion, confusion, stress. But violence is not confusion, and law does not excuse cruelty. Judge Strauss lifted a hand. Objection overruled. Continue, Mr. Lowell. Ethan faced the jury. The defense wants you to believe this was an accident, but intent is clear. You saw it. She didn't stumble. She was struck. Hazin. On the defense side, Veronica broke down. Her tears came fast and loud, mascara streaking her cheeks. I didn't mean it, she whispered. I swear I didn't mean it. Grant leaned away from her, jaw tight. The cameras caught the distance between them, the sudden fracture that silence could not hide. Ethan didn't flinch. Regret is not innocence, he said softly. We all saw what she did, and we all saw what he didn't do. He stood there and watched. He pointed toward Grant. This man had the power to stop the attack before it began. Instead, he let it happen. Then he used his money to manipulate the media, to call my sister unstable, to buy silence. That is not love, that is cowardice. The jury members exchanged glances. The atmosphere grew heavier with each word. Grant's lawyer stood again, his tone sharp. Mr. Lowell is letting emotion cloud his professionalism. This case is about facts, not family vengeance. Ethan replied calmly, Facts brought us here. The video is a fact. The witness statements are facts. The payments your client made to bury this story are facts. My emotion is not the evidence, Your Honor. The evidence is the truth. Judge Strauss nodded. Enough grandstanding. Continue with the witness testimony. Detective Ruiz took the stand. Her voice was clear and precise as she confirmed the chain of evidence, the authenticity of the footage, and the financial transactions traced to Grant's accounts. The defense tried to interrupt several times, but each objection fell flat. When she stepped down, Ethan returned to the center. Your Honor, we rest our presentation for today. Judge Strauss looked at the defense. Does the defense wish to cross-examine? Grant's lawyer whispered with him for a long moment before standing. No, Your Honor, the defense will respond tomorrow. The judge nodded. Very well, court will recess until 9 a.m. tomorrow. The defendants are remanded into custody for the evening. The gavel struck once, echoing like thunder. As the courtroom began to clear, reporters rushed to file their stories. Grant rose, his composure cracking for the first time. This isn't over, he muttered. Ethan packed his folder slowly, never looking at him. It's already over, you just haven't accepted it yet. Veronica was led out first, her wrists trembling as the bailiff guided her toward the holding cell. Grant followed, his expression hollow. The flash of cameras outside the courtroom turned their exit into a parade of disgrace. Ethan walked toward the double doors. The moment he stepped into the corridor, the noise of the crowd hit him, reporters shouting, lights flashing, voices demanding comment. He didn't stop. His focus was elsewhere, back at St. Mary's Hospital, where his sister still fought to breathe. He looked up toward the gray sky above the courthouse and whispered, "One step closer, Amber. One step closer." Then he turned toward the waiting elevator, ready to prepare for the final day of testimony, the day when judgment would fall and the world would finally see the weight of the truth. The courtroom was silent when the judge returned to her seat. The atmosphere was so heavy that even the sound of breathing seemed loud. Reporters filled every row, their pens ready, cameras poised for the final judgment. Outside, the crowd gathered beneath the courthouse steps, waiting for the verdict that had already divided the city. The air smelled of rain and tension. Judge Helen Strauss looked over her glasses at the defendants. Her voice carried across the room, calm and steady. This court has reviewed the evidence, the testimony, and the video footage in detail. The facts are indisputable. She paused, letting the silence stretch. Veronica Shaw, You were found guilty of aggravated assault, resulting in severe bodily harm. Your actions were deliberate, reckless, and cruel. Veronica sat trembling, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Her makeup had long since streaked away. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't respond. The judge continued, "Grant Caldwell, you are found guilty of obstruction of justice and domestic abuse. You used your wealth and influence to suppress evidence and manipulate public perception. You failed not only as a husband, but as a citizen bound by law." Grant's face twitched, but he kept his eyes forward. His composure was cracking, and everyone could see it. "Veronica Shaw," the judge said, her tone unrelenting, "this court sentences you to 8 years in state prison." The gavel struck once. Veronica gasped, tears flooding her eyes. "Please," she cried, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to. I didn't want to hurt her." The judge's eyes didn't soften. Intent does not erase consequence. "Grant Caldwell," she said next, "you are sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 6. You are also ordered to pay restitution for damages and medical costs associated with Mrs. Lowell's recovery." The gavel struck again. The sound echoed through the hall like thunder. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the murmurs began. Reporters whispered, cameras clicked, and the first headlines were already forming in their minds. Justice, served in courthouse assault. Millionaire faces 10 years. Grant rose from his seat, his voice shaking with rage. "This is madness," he said. "You're destroying my life." Judge Strauss replied, "No, Mr. Caldwell, you destroyed it yourself." 2 officers approached. Grant tried to step back, but they took him by the arms. The flash of cameras caught the moment as his wrists were cuffed. The sound of metal clinking was swallowed by the gasps of the courtroom. Veronica sobbed uncontrollably as another officer read her rights. Ethan sat still at the plaintiff's table, his hands clasped tightly. For the first time in weeks, his shoulders lowered slightly, as if a weight had lifted. He looked up at the judge. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said quietly. The judge gave a brief nod. "Mr. Lowell, you and your sister showed great strength in the face of injustice. The court commends your resolve." Ethan rose to his feet. "It wasn't just strength, Your Honor, it was truth." The judge's eyes softened for a fleeting second before she struck the gavel one final time. "This court is adjourned!" The sound reverberated like the closing of a door. As the bailiffs escorted Grant and Veronica out, reporters surged forward. The guards shouted for order, but the crowd pressed closer, their cameras capturing every step. Veronica covered her face, weeping. Grant's eyes darted wildly as flashes blinded him. He stumbled once, but straightened immediately, his pride refusing to collapse even as everything else around him did. Outside, the roar of the public was deafening. Protesters cheered, holding signs above their heads. "Justice for Amber, truth wins." The sound of clapping, shouting, and crying blended together into something almost holy. Ethan exited the courthouse through the main doors. The light hit his face as the crowd parted slightly. Microphones shot toward him, voices overlapping. "Mr. Lowell, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you think justice was truly served? What will happen to your sister now?" He paused for a brief moment. "Justice," he said firmly, "isn't revenge. It's the truth finally being heard. My sister's voice was silenced that day on the courthouse steps, but today, the law spoke for her." The reporters fell silent for a moment, absorbing his words. Then the questions began again, but Ethan had already turned away. Detective Ruiz met him at the foot of the steps, a small smile flickering across her face. "You did it," she said. "We did it," he corrected. "Now let's hope Amber can finally rest." The first drops of rain began to fall. The gray clouds that had lingered all day finally broke open, washing the marble steps clean. Ethan tilted his head back slightly, feeling the cool water run across his skin. Around him, people cheered and cried, their umbrellas opening like flowers in the storm. Across the plaza, a large screen mounted on a building replayed the moment the judge delivered the sentence. Grant and Veronica's faces flashed in the rain-soaked light. Their fall from power was complete. Ethan looked up at the image and whispered, "You can't hide from the truth forever." He turned and began walking down the steps. Each one felt lighter than the last. The sound of rain hitting stone followed him, steady and rhythmic. At the bottom of the stairs, a news van broadcasted the live coverage. The anchor's voice filled the plaza. In a landmark verdict, Grant Caldwell and Veronica Shaw have been sentenced for their roles in the assault on Amber Lowell. Public reaction has been overwhelmingly supportive of the decision. Across the nation, rallies and vigils continue to honor victims of domestic violence. The phrase, "Justice for Amber," has become a symbol of resilience and hope. Ethan stopped for a moment to listen. The anchor's words faded under the sound of thunder rolling across the sky. He looked toward the distant skyline, where the lights of St. Mary's Hospital glimmered faintly through the rain. He whispered softly, "It's over, Amber. You're safe now." As the camera crews captured the final images of him walking away, the courthouse lights reflected off the wet pavement. The storm that had begun on the day of the attack was finally ending. The rain washed over the city like absolution, carrying away the remnants of cruelty and lies. And in that quiet moment beneath the storm, the long shadow of injustice began to lift, paving the way for what was still to come, the fragile promise of healing that waited beyond the hospital walls. The rain had stopped by morning. The city outside the hospital windows glistened under a pale, forgiving Sunday. For the first time in weeks, St. Mary's was quiet. Reporters had left the front steps, and the once constant flash of cameras had faded into memory. The storm of chaos that had consumed Los Angeles was finally gone. Inside room 214, the stillness was almost sacred. Machines hummed softly, their rhythmic beeps marking the fragile line between silence and life. Amber Lowell's eyelashes fluttered. A faint sigh escaped her lips as light filtered through the blinds. Her hand twitched under the blanket. The faint scent of disinfectant and rain mixed in the air. The world felt distant at first, as if she were waking from years of sleep. Her mind reached through fog, trying to remember where she was and why her body ached so deeply. Then the memories came rushing back. The marble steps, the cold, the voice of her brother calling her name. Her fingers moved again, weak but deliberate. A nurse noticed immediately and rushed to the bedside. "Dr. Brooks!" she called, her voice trembling with excitement. "She's awake!" Moments later, Dr. Nathan Brooks entered, still wearing his nightcoat from an all-night shift. His calm professionalism barely hid the relief in his eyes. "Amber," he said gently, checking her vitals. "Can you hear me?" Amber blinked, her lips dry. "Where am I?" Her voice was thin, fragile. "You're at St. Mary's," he said softly. "You've been asleep for some time. You're safe now." She swallowed, her eyes flicking toward the monitor beside her. "How long?" "Almost 3 weeks," he replied. "You were in a coma after the trauma. We managed to stabilize both you and the baby." Her breath caught. "The baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My baby," Dr. Brooks smiled gently. "Your child is alive. Heartbeat steady. You both made it through." Tears filled her eyes. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach. The faint outline of a heartbeat monitor pulsed in time with her own. "Thank God," she said, the words barely audible. The nurse stepped closer. "I'll call your brother." Within minutes, the door opened and Ethan entered, still wearing the same dark coat from the trial. His hair was disheveled, his eyes red from sleepless nights. But when he saw her awake, something inside him broke loose. He froze in the doorway, his breath catching like he'd forgotten how to breathe. Amber smiled weakly. "You look terrible," she whispered. He laughed softly, walking to her side. "You have no idea how good it is to hear your voice." Her hand reached for his. "You didn't give up, did you?" "Not for a second." His voice cracked, and he looked down, blinking hard. "You did the hard part. You came back." Amber's eyes filled again. "What happened?" "It's over," he said quietly. "Grant and Veronica were found guilty. They're both in custody. 10 years for him, 8 for her." Amber closed her eyes. "Justice." The word lingered in the air like a prayer. Ethan squeezed her hand gently. "You should have seen it. The whole courtroom. When the video played, no one could even breathe. The truth finally spoke for itself." She smiled faintly. "You were my voice when I didn't have one." He shook his head. "No, you were the reason I could keep fighting." "Doctor." Brooks cleared his throat softly. "She'll need rest," he said. "Her body's weak, but recovery looks promising." Ethan nodded. "Thank you, doctor." The nurse adjusted the blanket, dimmed the lights, and slipped out of the room. When the door closed, only the steady hum of machines remained. Ethan sat down beside her, his hand never leaving hers. Amber stared at the ceiling, her voice calm. When I was asleep, I dreamed of the courthouse steps. But they weren't white anymore, they were covered in light. I kept walking up, and I wasn't afraid. Ethan listened quietly, his throat tight. Maybe that's your mind letting go of what they did. Maybe, she whispered. Or maybe it means I finally made peace. They sat in silence for a while. The light through the blinds shifted across the floor, painting soft golden lines on the wall. Outside, a bird landed on the window ledge, shaking off droplets from its wings. Amber followed it with her eyes, smiling faintly. "Do people still talk about it?" she asked. "They talk about you," Ethan said. "They call you a symbol now." Justice for Amber became more than a movement. It's hope for everyone who's been silenced. Her eyes glistened again. "I never wanted fame. I just wanted peace." "You earned both," he said softly. She turned her head toward him. "And you? What happens now?" He gave a tired smile. "Now I go back to work. There are other cases, other people who need a voice. But I'll stay close. You're not going through recovery alone." Amber squeezed his hand weakly. "You've always been stubborn like that." He chuckled. "It runs in the family." The door opened again as Dr. Brooks returned with a chart. "I'll keep her under observation for a few more days," he said to Ethan. "She'll need therapy, both physical and emotional. But she's strong, stronger than most." Amber's eyes met the doctor's. "Thank you for not giving up on me." He smiled. "You did the hard part. We just kept the lights on." After he left, Ethan leaned forward. "You should rest now. You've been fighting long enough." Amber's eyelids grew heavier. "Stay until I fall asleep?" "Always." Her breathing slowed as she drifted back into light sleep. Ethan sat quietly beside her, watching the steady pulse of the monitor. Each beep was proof of survival, each breath a reminder that justice had meaning beyond the courtroom. He stood finally, walking toward the window. The city stretched out below, washed clean by the night's rain. He rested a hand on the cold glass and whispered, "We made it." Behind him, Amber stirred slightly in her sleep, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. The sun continued to rise, spilling soft light across the room. Ethan turned back to look at her one more time before leaving. "You'll see it soon," he said softly. "The world waiting for you." The hallway outside was quiet as he stepped out. Nurses passed with gentle smiles, the hum of the hospital steady and peaceful. Down the corridor, a small sign pointed toward the nursery ward. The faint sound of newborn cries echoed from behind the glass. Ethan paused for a moment, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. He whispered, "Tomorrow." And as he walked away, the sound of life continued behind him, the soft, steady rhythm of heartbeats that promised the beginning of something new. 1 year later, the city of Los Angeles looked different. The courthouse steps, once stained with blood and rain, now gleamed under a golden afternoon Sunday. The marble had been cleaned, restored, and polished until it shone like new. Yet for those who remembered what had happened there, every reflection still carried a memory. It was no longer a place of tragedy. It had become a symbol of rebirth. Across the plaza, a crowd gathered beneath a white banner that read, "Amber Foundation for Survivors, Opening Ceremony." Reporters stood quietly this time, not chasing a scandal, but witnessing healing. A small stage had been set up, lined with pale yellow flowers, the same color as the dress Amber had worn the day of the attack. Amber stood at the center of the stage, wearing a soft cream blouse and a simple skirt. In her arms, she held her daughter, Grace Lowell, now 1 year old. The child's dark curls framed a face so peaceful it seemed untouched by the pain her mother had endured. Amber's eyes glistened as she looked out at the sea of faces before her. Among them were nurses from street, Marys, volunteers, survivors of domestic violence, and strangers who had found strength through her story. When the applause quieted, Amber stepped toward the microphone. Her voice was steady, gentle, but full of life. "A year ago, I stood on these same steps with fear in my heart," she said. "I thought everything was ending. But today, I know that what I called an ending was really a beginning. Pain broke me open, but truth built me back." The crowd listened, silent and intent. The wind lifted a few strands of her hair as she continued. "This foundation exists for those who are still afraid to speak, for those who think no one will believe them. I was silent once. Now I know silence can be more dangerous than any wound. So this place will be a voice, a home, a promise." Applause rose again, soft at first, then stronger, spreading like a wave through the crowd. From the front row, Ethan watched his sister with quiet pride. He wore a gray suit, his posture straight, his expression calm but deeply moved. Beside him sat Detective Laura Ruiz and Dr. Nathan Brooks, both clapping warmly. Ruiz leaned toward Ethan. "She's a natural," she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. "She always was. She just needed the world to see it." On stage, Amber adjusted Grace in her arms. The baby cooed, grabbing at the microphone. Laughter rippled through the audience. Amber chuckled softly. "I guess she wants to speak too," she said. "Maybe one day she will. Maybe she'll tell her own story, one not born of pain but of hope." She looked up at the courthouse behind her, its towering columns shining in the sunlight. "A place that once took everything from me now gives something back. It reminds me that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom." Her words carried through the plaza, gentle but firm. After the ceremony, people moved toward the new building beside the courthouse, where glass doors opened into a bright lobby. Inside, walls were painted a soft yellow, filled with sunlight and photographs of survivors who had rebuilt their lives. On one wall, a plaque read, "Dedicated to those who refuse to stay silent." Amber walked slowly through the room, holding Grace close. Ethan followed behind her, his steps steady. Volunteers stopped to thank her. One woman with tears in her eyes saying, "You saved my life. I saw your story on the news, and I left my abuser the next day." Amber's eyes softened. She placed a hand on the woman's shoulder. "You saved yourself. I just helped you remember how strong you already were." "Len," the woman nodded, smiling through tears. Later, as the crowd thinned and the evening light turned golden, Amber stepped outside again. The plaza was quiet now. Balloons swayed in the breeze. The marble steps glowed softly in the sunset. She stood for a long moment, staring at them, remembering everything, the fall, the pain, the fear, and the moment her brother's voice broke through it all. Ethan joined her, slipping his hands into his pockets. "You did it," he said quietly. She smiled. "We did it. You sure you're ready for what comes next?" he asked. Amber looked at him, then down at her daughter. "I don't think anyone is ever ready for life after survival, but I'm not afraid anymore." Ethan nodded slowly. "That's enough." The two stood together in silence, watching the last rays of sunlight stretch across the courthouse steps. The city hummed in the distance, alive and moving forward. After a moment, Amber turned to him. "Do you ever think about that day?" "Every time I pass this place," he admitted, "but not with anger anymore, just gratitude that you're still here." She looked back at the building. "I used to hate these steps. I used to dream about erasing them from the world. But now, I see something else. They remind me of how far we've come." Ethan smiled. "That's what Dad would have said." Amber laughed softly. "He would have told us to stop overthinking and go home for dinner." They both laughed, the sound light and easy. Grace reached up from Amber's arms, tiny fingers brushing at the air. Amber kissed her forehead gently. "You're my second chance," she whispered. The plaza lights flickered on as dusk settled. Volunteers began packing up the last of the decorations. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed 6 times, their soft echoes mingling with the evening breeze. Amber took one last look at the courthouse, then stepped toward the stairs. Slowly, she began to climb. Ethan followed a few steps behind, his eyes glistening. When she reached the 5th step, she paused. Pulling a small bouquet of pale yellow flowers from her bag, she knelt and placed them down. "This was where I fell," she said softly. "So this is where I'll begin again." Ethan stood beside her, his voice low. "You already have!" Amber smiled through tears. She rose to her feet, holding Grace close. The child giggled, reaching for the fading sunlight. Together, they walked down the stairs, mother, daughter, and brother, toward the open plaza bathed in gold. As they reached the bottom, Amber turned back one last time. The courthouse glowed behind her, radiant in the twilight. For the first time, it looked beautiful. She whispered, "Thank you." Then she faced forward, her steps sure and steady. As the light wrapped around her like a promise, the world had seen her fall. Now it would see her rise,